So I think, quite obviously, this is a very, very powerful, I think, section of the thing. It just gets to such a key and deep part of human experience, that experience of loss, and in a way that is the experience of death, as far as I think we can actually experience it. It is the experience of the death of the other and all the things that it brings with it, and one of the things it brings with it is this crisis, that the absence of the loved one forces us to make certain decisions about their status. Have they been annihilated? That is, they do not exist in any form. Death takes them entirely. Or, as really the Christian believes, do they exist in some form which is unavailable to me at the moment? One of the things that Landsberg wants to say is that that is an open question, at least insofar as we experience the thing. At the end of section 4, on page 204, he says, "The sudden absence of the person as spirit may be interpreted in many different ways, particularly according to the differences inherent in the experience itself. Its fundamental content is never annihilation, but rather something like an open question." Okay, that is, it is not clear that the person has been annihilated. It's an open question, and it's a question, again, which is a truly, I would call it an existential question. Although Landsberg has some problems with the existentialists, as we'll see. It's an existential question because there's no real preponderance of evidence either way, yet you have to choose, right? Just the anguish that existentialists often talk about. Well, let's back it up a little bit to that moment of the experience of the death of the other. The very interesting continuation of the description on page 200. This is the second paragraph. The experience of the death of a friend, the neighbor, the loved one, I think he means them pretty much interchangeably, is unique each time that it occurs. Here we meet death in its own personal uniqueness. That is, just as every person is unique, every person's death is unique. Each death is as unique as each person's manner of being present. But an intuition of the necessity of death may then arise, because after all, he's looked for this, the necessity of death. The eyes of the spirit have been able to grasp the intimate connection between an event of vital importance and the disappearance of the person. And vital means bodily, life, biological life importance. The person becomes absent after this strange fashion at the very moment when the vital process in a given organism reaches its end. The change of relationship may be recognized as characteristic and necessary to all experience of such a kind. The living body becomes a corpse. That's the uncanny, strange, eerie, disturbing phenomenon of the living body becoming a dead body. But a corpse is no longer a possible place for the person to inhabit. Even the aspect of the corpse teaches us not only that the vital process proper to a human being is here drawn to an end, but also the moment we introduce the category of the person, that a personal spirit can no longer dwell in this body. In the open eyes of the corpse, we perceive not only the end of life, that is, life in the biological sense, but also the disappearance of the person as spirit. We see that the one, the person, can no longer be present because the other, bodily life, is no longer there. Life, in the biological sense, shows by its end, its termination, that it is the basis of presence, an indispensable basis for the realization of the spiritual personality in the human being. That is an incredible, again, for a Christian writer, for a Catholic philosopher to make that sort of admission, which I think is entirely true, is really very courageous, because what he's just basically said is that part of the phenomenology, the experience of being with the dead person, is a realization that the end of the living body and the disappearance of the person are simultaneous, which tells us what? That the person, you and I as persons, are distinct from our bodies. We are not totally defined by our being an organism. However, the person that we are depends upon the body for its expression. You and I have very little idea of what we would be like without a body, right? We may believe in the immortality of the soul. We may believe in a spirit that is possible to have an existence apart from the body. We may believe that, but we would find it probably impossible to imagine. Article of faith. The person that we know, both ourselves and others, that we depend upon our bodies for, as he says, a place for us to inhabit, a place for us to express ourselves, a place for us to realize ourselves through these bodies that we have. So when the fact that the body ceases to function at death is also a sign that the person can no longer express itself. That is, what is it? It is not evidence that the person has been annihilated, but it is really an indication that, wow, I mean, if the person disappears at the moment when the body ceases to function, that's a pretty good indication that the person is dependent upon the body, which just makes the task of what he's trying to do even more difficult. And that's why it's so courageous, is that he doesn't ignore any of the problems, any of the obstacles, because ultimately what he wants to establish is that the person does transcend death, that there is personal survival, that we have reason to hope. But he's so honest and so, unflinching in his description of the experience of death, that he's willing to really stack the odds against himself, not to ignore anything in the experience of the death of the other that might discourage us from thinking that the other, the one we love, actually survives death and has not been annihilated. I think it's all the more reason to read this with a profound respect. The rest of the section 5 is really kind of looking at the further ramifications of this experience, the way that death is really absence. Death is the space. Death is the shattering of the community that we had with someone. He says on the top of page of 201, the awareness of the necessity of death is only provoked by participation, by the personal love in which the whole experience is bathed. We constituted a we with the dying man, and it is through this we, through the very strength of this community, which constitutes, as it were, a new order of persons, that we are led into an experiential knowledge of our own mortality. For a moment, we have our feet in the land of the dead, and that's only because of love, right? We can only be said to really participate in the death of the other because we have a true community with them, and that's love. So when they die, for a moment, we die too. A moment later, we are once more outside the kingdom of shadows, but during that moment, we experienced its bitter cold, and no one is ever quite the same after he has felt it. And he continues that sort of line of thinking in the top of page 202, really bottom page 201. There is an existential problem which becomes clear in the painful knowledge that there is no possibility of any further exteriorized communication between us and the dead man, that sort of necessary space between us, the distance. Not at any rate through his voice, which we knew so well. Those lips will no longer speak to me. Those glazing eyes will no longer see me. My community with this person seems shattered. Again, the absence isn't like the absence of somebody who's on a vacation or in the hospital or on a business trip. The absence is an absolute, So the community with this person seemed shattered, says Landsberg, but the community was to some degree myself. That is, I was. Part of what I am is my community with the people that I love. And to this degree, I experienced death in the very core of my own existence. So if we're looking for the experience of death, I think that this is about as close as we get. It's the experience of absence, the absence of the person as spirit. And he talks about the ways that we deal with death. The way that he said, in World War I, when families would learn of the deaths of their sons or their husbands or their fathers, they would want to know the details of how they died. And that may seem strange. Why would you want to know that? But Landsberg says it's very understandable. It's an attempt to, once the person has died, they're gone. They're the separation. We want to know the details of how they died because we want to reestablish the connection with them. We want to feel the warmth of life. We want to know what they were like before, what happened before they died, before that irrevocable absence was created. He's given us what I think is closest as close as it'll come to and the experience of death. But also he's raised some very troubling questions about the status of the dead, because he sort of left us with the same existential question. If death is the absence of the person as spirit, is that absence because of the annihilation of the person, or because that person is simply unavailable to us in the form we are now?